All right. It is fall. The leaves are dropping, the temperatures are dropping, and you would think the ducks are flying, but they're not yet. The deer are certainly moving around. Every year, trees shed what no longer serves them, and I've always been kind of fascinated by this. Like they put so much effort into putting those leaves on throughout the spring and the summer, and it's there for 2/3 of the year. And then this time of year, all those leaves just fall to the ground. And it seems, evolutionarily speaking, that's like a waste of resources. You put so much time and resources into growing all that biomass, and then you just let it fall to the ground. And there's some parallels here with leadership that we want to talk about, along with a lot of other things. We're going to be talking about what it means to go to the next level of leadership. But really, what the trees are doing is they're letting go of the stuff that isn't serving them anymore. And what's interesting about that is that those leaves then turn around and nourish the roots and the ground that that tree is anchored in. That's a little bit what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, and we as leaders, we have to do the same. The thinking habits and strategies that got us here, those leaves that we've grown all year, might not be what carries us forward. So today we're going to be talking about 10 mindset shifts new and rising leaders need to make to go the next level of their leadership journey.
Because just like trees here in the fall, sometimes letting go is really the only way to grow.
This is the Parks and Restoration Podcast, the show for parks and natural resource professionals who, despite all the challenges we face, want to leave a legacy of healthy ecosystems, quality parks, and future generations of people who care about the natural world. I'm Jeremy Yost, Natural Areas Manager at Potawatomi County Conservation, coming to you from the Loess Hills of western Iowa, where it's the happiest time of the year. Upland bird season, obviously. I just got back from a hunt where I saw over 80 pheasants.
What?
Yeah,
You didn't even have to pay for them?
Right? All on public land.
Goodness, there's the value of habitat. And I'm Chris Lee, Executive Director at Des Moines County Conservation and a leadership consultant, coming to you from the east coast of Iowa, right on the Mississippi River, where the duck hunters are seriously questioning whether this is actually the most traveled flyway in North America. I used to be a duck hunter myself, so I'm kind of fascinated by this. Anyway, before we start today's episode, I want to encourage you to join the Next Level Leadership community. Now, I've called this a couple different things before, but this is what we're naming it now.
Yeah, and look, we know it's like what it's like to be overwhelmed and under-resourced. Navigating agency bureaucracy while trying to lead a team and make an impact on parks and resources you serve, you don't have to navigate this alone.
Exactly. By joining this community, you'll get bi-weekly insights from us about how to be the next level leader that we talk about in these episodes. You'll get first and or exclusive access to programs, meetups, and learning resources. And best of all, you're going to be joining a community of other dedicated professionals focused on becoming the leaders that our communities, our parks, and our native species need us to be.
So to join, just go to parksandrestoration.com and put your name and email in the boxes. It's as easy as that.
Yeah. And we've got an exciting opportunity coming up for this community. On November 21st, we are hosting an exclusive virtual meetup with Jessica D'Angelo. She's the author of the new book, The Wild Advantage: Why Your Brain on Nature is Your Boldest Business Move. It's hit bestseller status in a couple different categories on Amazon, and Jess will be joining us to talk about all the things nature-based business strategy. And we might be giving away some stuff too. So if you're not already part of the community, go to parksandrestoration.com and join us. If you do already get emails from me, if you're one of those that has attended one of my speaking or leadership programs in the past and you already get those emails, you'll be getting the invite to that exclusive meetup here coming up on November 21st. So Jessica's a friend of mine, and she just wrote this book, and we're super excited to be taking this business strategy outdoors. And that's what she talks about in this book. And it's a fantastic book. I bought it the day she asked us to go out there and buy it to get her on the bestseller list. And there's a big push for that. You might have got an email from me if you're on that list. So anyway, we'll begin to talk to her, and that should be a good time. So
yeah, I'm really excited. I'm definitely really excited for that. You know, if you got those emails like me, like Chris is not a robot. That was really a book, and we're really going to get the chance to talk to the author of that book. I'm really excited.
Yeah.
Let's jump into today's episode. So things change when you move into leadership or advance as a leader, and we're calling this next level leadership. And today we're going to go through these 10 mindset shifts that you have to make in order to take that next level, to get to that next level of leadership. And, just progress in your leadership journey.
And you're going to notice that these kind of stack on each other, and many of them are interrelated. You'll also notice that we distinguish between management and leadership a little bit, and that's really kind of the crux of this is moving up the leadership scale. So if you've been in your working world for any amount of time, you'll have noticed that there are different levels of leaders, and those just because you are in charge of people does not make you a leader. And so we're going to differentiate between that a little bit and talk about what it means to kind of be an early level leader, and then some of the mindset shifts that we need to take to go to the next level. And so the difference between management and leadership are two very different approaches. And we're going to be focused on the leadership side of things, specifically these higher level leadership traits that we aspire to here at Parks and Restoration and what we talk about on every episode of this show, because really we truly believe that better parks is a product of leadership. And for those of us that are in the world of parks and conservation, it's incumbent upon us to be the best leaders that we can so that we can have the best parks and make the biggest impact that we can. So whether you're just stepping into leadership role or you've been in leadership for, excuse me, or you've been in a leadership role for a while and you're looking to improve, there's almost certainly something in this list of 10 items or 10 mindsets shifts that we're going to be talking about that will help you take that next step. Hence why we call it the next level leadership.
Exactly. Getting into this, it's this idea that when you're the worker, you're the person that's just out there getting shit done, and you're able to really, really push yourself and do all of these things. Those things that like got you here, got you to that point, are not necessarily going to be the things that can push you forward as a leader. And so, like Chris said, like we have to make that mind shift, that change. And the first thing we want to talk about is just that hustle versus balance, like outworking versus sustainability, like your work ethic and like your willingness to put in the extra work and outwork everyone else and just be that one that's out there getting shit done and just really pushing the envelope forward. Like it may have gotten you to this point, but it's unsustainable. Like as a next level leader, you're going to actually have to like your job is going to be to like model boundaries. You can't just be putting in 80 hours a week every week. It just won't be sustainable and you won't be there for your people. You actually have to set the expectations and the norms and then be there to reward the behaviors that you want to see forward to build that team. And so another thing is that it's your job to make sure that you're not just extracting the value from your team. You're not constantly just trying to get every little thing out of it as if it's a limited resource. Like it will run out. Like I just this week we had one of our interns leave, and so we were doing an exit interview, and she brought up this idea that like if we're going to be just brush cutting for 4 days a week, like that doesn't feel sustainable. And I had to sit there and take that and think about this dichotomy about like we have to get this project done, but we also want to like make sure that they're getting the best thing that they can out of their internship, and that they're also not like burning out in the middle of the summer by just doing this one project and extracting too much out of them.
Yeah, I mean your team is not an oil well, and it seems like so much of management mindset, or I hate to even call it leadership mindset, but head of organization mindset is often let's just see how much value we can extract from the people that we have here. Let's use them up as much as we can before they leave because they're probably just going to fucking leave anyway. And let's milk them for all they're worth and hope the door doesn't hit them in the ass on the way out. And it pisses me off when I see organizations operate like that, because it's antithetical to our very ethos as natural resource managers, as conservationists, as people who care about the natural world. We go out there, and our whole effort is to sustain the natural resources that are out there. And then we turn around and we go into our workplaces and we're just beating the hell out of our team and just working them to death. And then we wonder why we can't retain people or recruit new interns for next year. Well, what the hell do you think? And so that's really what we're getting at here.
Right. And so like this idea is, and instead of just like pulling all of the energy, pulling all of the resources out of those people, how can we actually look at our team and get that energy where it needs to go and remove what blocks it? So like in our last episode, we talked about this energy assessment that you can now get from our website, that we can think about what's going to give our team energy, and also like where they fit in that widget, or the like 6 types of working genius, and how can we put our people in the right places so that we're not just constantly extracting energy from them, we can actually build our team so that we're have the ability to give them energy. And so like this idea, you might actually call it like regenerative leadership. And it kind of has some parallels to even like regenerative ag. Like we're not in conventional agriculture, you're almost like mining the resources from the land. You're constantly taking away, and you're taking away that the carbon from the soil itself. And in regenerative ag, you're actually doing things and putting energy where it needs to be so that you're actually building up that carbon in the soil. And this is even like what we led the show off with. Like, even from the natural world, trees do this. They grow their leaves all year, then they shed those leaves. And those are actually what's building the soil that's going to make them have healthy roots and be able to really grow from the ground up.
Yeah. That I've got several, like a whole row of white pines in my yard. And they've been growing long enough now that they're finally getting that needle bed underneath them. And I'm convinced that pines will grow better after they've had long enough to shed those needles and change the pH of the soil underneath them. And that's really what's happening here. So, it used to be you could bust your ass and you would get ahead by outworking everyone around you. But when you step into this next level leadership role, it's not about that anymore. It's about how can you sustain this operation, both for yourself and for your team, which leads us into number two. It used to be about you. Now it's all about your team. If you are in any sort of leadership role whatsoever, and you don't have to hold the title of leader, I want to be very clear about this. Anybody at any level of an organization can be a leader. We've probably all been around those people that they just have this natural knack, and people want to follow them, and they have just a really good way of rallying the people around them and building a great workplace and really influencing the culture. That's leadership. You don't have to hold the title of director or CEO or supervisor or whatever it is. You can be a leader at any level. And so when you step into that role and when you own that role and you want to be that next level leader, it becomes about your team. As you were coming up through the ranks, maybe you started out as a frontline employee, you were focused on your accomplishments, your ability to go out there and get shit done, your ability to check the next thing off the list. And that was what got you promoted. That's what got you moved up. And that's just the natural way of the working world, is that's how you get promoted. But when you step into that leadership role, it ceases to be about you. Now it's all about your team, making your team successful. And only when your team is successful are you then successful, because the leader is simply just the face of the team in a way, but they're the embodiment of the team that they're leading. And so, yeah, they can go out there and wave their flags and stuff and say, "Oh, look at how great I did," but that isn't high level leadership. It's when those leaders go out there and say, "Look what we did. Look what my team accomplished. Look what we were able to do by working together." And when that leader steps in there and creates the conditions that that team then can focus and can function on a high level, it is unbelievable, and it's unlimited what you can accomplish. And so when you move up into next level leadership, you're no longer focused on individual gain or individual success or your pay rate or your success. You succeed by lifting others up. And in so doing that, you have an exponential impact. And I remember this when I considered taking this executive director job, I had to think long and hard about whether I really wanted to move into that administrative role, because I knew it was going to take me out of the field, out of doing the stuff that I love to do. But I also recognized that by leading the team and by being the person in charge of creating the workplace dynamic and creating the conditions for the team at my workplace, I knew I could have an exponential effect, not just on what I could do by driving the tractor or swinging the chainsaw. And so that was why I stepped in that. And that's what next level leaders do.
Yeah, I think it's really important to like when you're making this change, you really have to not think about your individual successes. You have to be able to feel that success when your team gets something done and like celebrate that success along the way. That like just because it wasn't you that was actually physically out there cutting down the tree, the project got done and you're having an exponential impact by being that leader and creating that environment for that to happen.
Exactly. And, I wouldn't be a very good leadership consultant if I didn't invoke the name of Steve Jobs every now and then. And, I should point out that Steve Jobs did not create the iPhone. He maybe had been some of the brains behind the idea for what this device turned out to be. But by his own admission, his greatest accomplishment, the thing that he was most proud of building, was the company that became capable of creating such a world-changing device, and all the devices and all the innovations that came before and after it. That's really what, towards the end of his career and his life there for that matter, I've heard him quoted as saying, he was most proud of building the company that Apple was, and the scrappy company and the world-changing company that was constantly innovating and coming up with new ways to challenge the status quo. That doesn't come from any one device. That comes from a company that you build, and it comes from the team that you lead.
Exactly, and I think that's a great point that it's really just all about creating that environment. Like, he got to be the one to stand up there and present the iPhone, but none of that happened without the team around him. And thinking about this teamwork aspect, like when you're the one out there getting things done, you might run into this thing where you always feel competitive with others. And so this rolls us right into number 3, that you you have to make this change from competition versus cooperation. And so, like, there are a bunch of different examples, even in ecology, that like competition is like this low order function. In mature systems, cooperation is the rule. The same thing applies in leadership. The natural system is filled with examples of cooperation. Oaks and squirrels, an oak tree drops the squirrels go, and the oak tree drops the acorns, and the squirrels go
Occasionally
and
drops the squirrel
cache.
too, I suppose.
The squirrels go and cache the acorns, and then that acorn is able to grow into a new tree, and that whole cycle just revolves around. Trees and fungal communities, like one doesn't live without the other. Plants and pollinators, one doesn't live without the other. Lions hunting together and raising young communally. Orcas creating a big wave to knock seals off of ice. Like, these are all, like, it's just completely filled with this idea of cooperation and not competition. And so, as a leader, it's your job to figure out how you can bring all of the pieces and players together to accomplish more than they could individually. Even thinking back to our elephant episode, thinking about that, if you're just that person out there individually and you're trying to eat that elephant, you can only get it done one bite at a time. But if you work in cooperation, you actually get to invite your friends over and just throw a big barbecue and get that thing done.
One of these days, I'm gonna have to try elephant, because we keep talking about it on this show. I should probably try that. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. You don't, just like the big projects you've done out there with the Save the Prairie Day and the Cooperative Burn Week and everything. That's all cooperative stuff, and no one agency could accomplish what it is you guys accomplish without bringing in all those resources. And by building that culture of cooperation, it then ripples out. And so the impact is beyond just your own jurisdictional boundaries, but it goes off into other counties and into other organizations. And it's just a higher order level of operating.
Exactly. And like, you just get so much more done on that higher level of thinking, and getting away from this idea that it's not us versus them or me versus him anymore. It's us and them. We're all working together. And another example here is that, like, Apple became a household name only after it allowed Windows to run on its devices, and now it uses Google as its default search engine, and it solved the like illegally downloading program by creating iTunes and partnering with the music industry. And so they saw these issues and then found a way to work together to solve them.
Yeah.
And
Like so if I look at our demographics, most of our listeners are uh my age and younger. So I think it's like, I don't know, 20 something to low 40s, and I'm 43. And maybe you do too. Remember the days of Napster.
I
I
definitely
think
do.
there's like
Uh,
WinMX, and there's a couple others that you just, you went around and you found the song that you wanted, and you downloaded it for free. And it was turning the music industry on its head. And then Apple comes along, like, we're going to create this iTunes thing, and people are going to buy music for 99 cents. And the music industry was like, no, they're not. And the world said, no, they're not. And Apple said, no, they will. Let's partner together, and let's give people a legit opportunity to get the music that they want, and build this system so that it is easy. And rather than an us versus them, where it's, Metallica going and suing the 16-year-old kid or whatever that was that they did, that got Lars and everybody hated that guy for a while. But they said, let's just partner together, and rather than an us versus them, let's do this together. And once they started doing that, they became, obviously iTunes became a thing, and buying music isn't so much thing anymore. Everybody streams it, but it was a higher level order of, rather than what can
Exactly.
we do
And
to compete against Napster or compete against this downloading stuff. It said, how do we just work with the players involved?
exactly. And like eventually you got to the point where like I remember like there's no way I'm gonna spend 99 cents for something I can like download for free. But then all of a sudden you get a virus on your parents' computer and like have to explain it. Like and then you go to the reputable source of iTunes and then you never look back.
Exactly. Yeah. Suddenly 99 cents a song is a hell of a deal compared to having to, buy a new hard drive or a new computer, or, even just have the conversation with your parents. But
Right.
so it's just a higher order level. And oftentimes I still, let's face it, we work in government, and budget times come along. And oftentimes it feels like you're in competition with the other county departments. And while that is still true, because there's only so much money to go around, and it's likely in my county that the sheriff's office and the secondary roads department is going to get more of their requests than I am as the measly little parks department. But if I can stop looking at it from the perspective of competition and look at it from the perspective of cooperation, is from the more of the perspective of, we're all in this county together. We're all dipping from the same pot of money, and they're all our constituents. The people that count on the sheriff's office to, come by and write the report when they hit that deer are the same people that hit that deer on the way to my park to go bow hunting there. And so when you look at it that way, suddenly the dynamic feels very, very different. And it changes the way you can communicate with your team, and just the way you can work with the leaders in your county and in your organization or in your state department or city council or whatever it is. And that a little bit leads us into number 4, in that it used to be about the work, and now it's about the culture. You'll notice kind of a consistent theme across a lot of these is that, what is it like? What's the culture like? So as an individual contributor, or even as a manager, an early level leader, it was all about what you could accomplish. We kind of, talked about this earlier. The task list, how many of those tasks can you cross off the list? The big project that, the big thing that you got done, and the grants that you raised, and the accomplishment. And yeah, who doesn't like those big wins? And absolutely, you should celebrate those. But as the next level leader that we're aspiring to be, it's less about that, and it's more about the culture you create. Because if you get that right, the accomplishments will almost take care of themselves. And you don't have to be in the day-to-day details and be the bottleneck. I've certainly found myself in this role, and a lot of times because I came up through the ranks at Des Moines County Conservation, and frankly, there's just times that I want to be in the day-to-day thick and thin of it, but I can't be. I need to be at the higher level stuff. And so I realized that if I can just create the conditions for my team to step up, my team to do really well. We talked about this in a previous episode. I think we call it Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast. All the strategy in the world, me sitting in my office and coming up with the strategic plans, and doing the surveys and all that kind of stuff. That strategy doesn't mean squat if you don't have a team motivated to deliver it. And that comes from culture. And so many of our organizations and our certainly the higher level picture of that tends to fall apart, especially in government, because and it seems like the bigger of an operation it gets, you go from the city or the county level up to the state level, up to the federal level, and that really has a way of kind of falling apart. And so you as a leader have an opportunity to create a culture, if not across your entire organization. Maybe if you're a DNR employee or a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service employee, our hearts go out to you, by the way, if you're stuck at home listening to this due to this stupid ass government shutdown. But anyway, just want to throw that in there. But like, if you're probably not going to change the entire culture of the agency, but you can certainly have an effect on the culture at your local field office or in your local work team, whatever it is. And so focusing on that is going to be how the big stuff gets done without you going out there and having to do it yourself. And again, it's that exponential impact thing that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, exactly. And like a couple things one thing that's always stuck with me is that my dad is in the military. And one of the ideas of leadership there is that basically at any moment you could be gone. And so you have to set up a culture or be a leader in a way that your people can be next person up and take over without you. And a little less morbid way of thinking of that I actually heard this week was that as a leader, you should be able to take a 2-week vacation and come back and it'll be like you were never even gone. And I think that if somebody thinks about that and then is like, how many phone calls, how many emails, how many questions do I have to answer every day? Think about what if you just shut off your phone and took a 2-week vacation? Would things operate without you? And if your answer is no, you really need to think about the culture that you're building at your organization.
Yes, that's a fantastic point, and I've seen this. I'll go to conferences and there's some of my colleagues that by their own admission, they can't go because if they walk away from the operation for a day, everything's going to fall apart. And I get in very small operations when you're only maybe one or two or three employees, you're kind of a big part of the workload. And so in order for things to get done, you have to be out there and doing it. So for you to step away, that's kind of difficult just from a workload perspective. But in a true leadership role, and I can hear people's alarm bells going off in their heads right now of, well, wouldn't that be just, working myself out of my job or making
Right.
myself irrelevant? And that's the point, because when you make yourself irrelevant for the day-to-day operations, you free yourself up to do the big picture stuff that a leader needs to do, that a next level leader needs to do. And so that's absolutely critical that you do that. And bringing up this point, I just had this very situation happen last week. We had an emergency in the family, and my wife had to be out of town with her brother, and they went up to Mayo Clinic, and so I had to pull dad duty and get the kids on and off the bus every day and do all the kid stuff, and that cuts into my work time. And I came into work and I told the team, I said, hey, I'm going to be in and out. My days are going to have to shrink. There's going to be some days I'm going to have to miss. And they said, don't worry about it. We got you. And they absolutely did. I mean, we did not miss a beat here. They did not need me here. And, they can always pick up the phone and call me if they need to, but they didn't. And I knew that this place can run without me here, and it frees me up to just do the high level stuff. And that's how a next level leader can really build a great culture. And again, you get that exponential impact.
Exactly. And like this brings up a point from the extreme ownership book too, that in order to be an effective leader, you have to essentially give your people enough space that they can do what they need to do, but you need to be close enough that you can step in and do what you need to do. And so part of this might not be that part of it is what you just said, that you have the flexibility to think about larger things, but you also have the flexibility to keep your eyes on the larger picture or the whole picture and not just the small details of the day to day. And you can step in when you need to and spend some of your leadership capital there and bring people along if you see something that's not going the right direction.
Absolutely.
So that brings us to number 5, which is a little bit of a change of gears, but number 5 here is rules and policies or traditions. This is how it's always been done versus flexibility. So as managers end up defaulting to policies a lot, or the standard operating procedures, or traditions or norms. And these are all good and certainly like help clarify expectations, which is really foundational to leadership. But being blindly married to these policies is a pitfall too many leaders fall into. For example, we've always worked 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. So no, you can't come in at 8:30. You can't take your kids to school. Like, how is that going to affect culture? Or the policy says we need 72 hours notice for days off. So no, you can't have a short notice day off when that front moves in and the ducks are flying. Or to just go hunt over your bird dogs on that first snowfall. And if this sounds familiar to you, thank you for listening, because those were examples we used last episode. But again, we're just reiterating those, that this is really about flexibility, and like this idea that burning in spring is the standard practice, but burning in other seasons will get different results, which may be better for different resources. And this was actually a conversation that happened in our office this week, that we're just really trying to figure out that, as we're using grazing on a larger scale and using fire on the scale that we're using it on, we started thinking about like how can we kind of balance the as you burn you balance with where you're going to graze. And so we actually set out some pretty large exclusion areas that typically we burn in the fall that we're going to burn in the spring now because that's going to end up focusing that grazing for next year's paddock. And, so having that flexibility to not just be like, this is the thing that we're doing and we have to stick with it. We're going to have that flexibility because on in the natural system, there is flexibility everywhere. So as a next level leader, take these concepts and look for ways to be flexible to benefit your team. And think, does this thing need to happen now or can it wait until tomorrow? Being able to be flexible and allow that thing to happen tomorrow may be that flexibility that you're looking for to allow someone to go hunt over their bird dogs. And just think about the dividends that that's going to pay for that employee and for that culture.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, this ties into our last one. By having that flexibility, what you get to do is cultivate energy. It's just like with the burns and natural resource management that we do. Say, removing cedars from the prairie, you're allowing that energy, that sunlight to reach down to those plants that you're trying to cultivate. And the same thing applies in your culture, getting that energy to the people that you're leading, because it is, as we said earlier, all about them. And if they derive a lot of energy, if they're in their element, this was that thing that I couldn't name in that last episode, and I finally come up with a name for it. Turns out it had been done, and I had read the book. I just couldn't get my brain to work on that. But if being in their element is hunting over their bird dog over that first snowfall, the energy that they're going to come back with, and this is certainly true in Jeremy's sense and in mine and in other ways, that's going to allow you to accomplish so much more as an organization, as a team, and of course as the individual in a leadership role. And so that kind of ties into number 6 here: control versus clarity and trust, or you could also look at this as intent over instructions. So managers and early level leaders are taught by the HR types, no offense to HR types out there, but they're taught to exert control. And this is how you're going to do it. And this is the way it's done. Next level leaders clearly communicate a broader vision, and then they empower their teams to execute. So what this means is, and so I really like to invoke the name of Brene Brown. And in her books, she talks about having that tough conversation with your team and having that awkward discussion of, okay, what does done look like? Because oftentimes the leader will have some picture in their head of what this thing is going to be. And then, like, we're gonna go in and we're gonna clear this hillside. And that's kind of all they say. And then someone goes out and they load up as many chainsaws as they can, and they go out there and they start clearing the hillside. And then the leader was like, well, no, I meant we're going to have a Save the Prairie Day, and we're going to invite in a bunch of other organizations to come in, and we're going to do a bunch of teamwork and really knock this thing out rather than spend weeks and weeks and weeks doing this thing. Like, this is grossly inefficient. And oh my God, what the hell are you doing? You guys are a bunch of idiots. I can't believe I work here. Does it sound familiar to anybody? I can guarantee that if your team is not meeting your expectations, or if they're falling short, almost inevitably, there's some level of miscommunication in there. There's some level of fault of your own that you didn't clearly communicate the expectations. And so as a next level leader, your job is not necessarily to come in and say, this is exactly how it's going to get done. Your job is to come in and have that conversation with your team and say, here's the bigger picture of the things we want to accomplish. We want to clear overgrown native remnant prairies from these hillsides, or we want to create amazing parks for people to come and have life-defining experiences. We want to create recreational opportunities so kids put down the damn PlayStation controller and come out and play softball for a few hours every couple days. Whatever it is in your organization, having those conversations, and then not so much getting into the weeds again about how it's going to get done, but saying, here's what done looks like. Here's the facilities that we want to have. Here's the level of impact we want to have on this landscape. Now go do it. And then you end up with someone on your team, say like Jeremy, that says, hey, why don't we put together this giant Save the Prairie Day, and we bring in a bunch of help and we get some help eating this elephant, because that hillside is way more than the two of us can handle by ourselves. And so what you find is that your teams, once they have a clear idea of what the overall vision is, they can innovate and they can find efficiencies. Now, here's the other side of that. They're not always going to get it right. And that's okay, because that's part of the innovation process. Going back to Steve Jobs, the first time he unveiled the iPhone, he had to have 3 different phones on his podium because no one phone could do all of the things that it was supposed to do. It wasn't there yet. They hadn't perfected it yet, and here he is showing it off. And so it's not always going to go right. And so you need to understand when you need to spend some of that leadership capital, and rather than coming in and saying, man, you really fucked that up, but coming in and saying, all right, where was I unclear in expectations? And then having that conversation around that. Again, control versus clarity. So that clarity is the next level leadership capacity that we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And that rolls us right into number 7, correcting versus coaching. Managers who correct their people, demanding they follow policies, procedures, demands, they use the traditional carrot and stick incentive, or they use like pizza parties as this like thing to get them to do things. That you listeners that have been listening for a few episodes, that's another callback. That just ends up not working. And as next level leaders, we actually have to go and coach our people, set expectations clearly, describing the destination. Like Chris said, like from Brene Brown, what does it look like? What does done look like? But they're actually leaving room for the individuality and flexibility of their teams to chart their own path. And so you're setting out your leader's intent and your end state, and then you allow for flexibility for it to happen in the middle. You can't like if someone is out there and you can't just go and like do this corrective action that is not going to get anywhere. So let's say that like someone is having trouble with a chainsaw. It gets you nowhere to just say, fine, step back, you grab the chainsaw and just say, watch and learn. That is not going to lift up your team. That's not going to build culture. But you can, of course, evaluate for safety. But if you actually give them the opportunity and give them space to learn, and so if you go and they're like, man, I'm just having trouble with this face cut, instead of just saying, all right, watch me do a face cut, evaluate for safety and allow them to do it and coach them through it. And know your people and ask questions and show if maybe there are those other people that they're like, you know what, I actually learn by watching others do it. That's an opportunity for you to step in and do it, but you had that conversation first. You had that conversation to say, is it okay if I show you how to do it? And then they'll watch and you can provide feedback as you go.
Yeah, that's this is a big one, because this is probably the biggest place where we confuse management and leadership. Management is using that carrot and stick stuff. It's that, well, you violated policy, so here's the consequence. Versus leadership is more of that coaching. So here's the policy, here's how it applies, and then when maybe doesn't get applied properly, you step in and say, okay, where were you unclear? And now this does not mean if it's a blatant and intentional violation where they just completely ignored everything you've told them. Yes, that's an entirely different situation. But if it's a particular situation, like, someone just doesn't have the experience with the chainsaw, or they don't have the experience in the skid loader, or they don't have the experience leading the youth program, or whatever it is, it's being there to help them out and not be like, you know what, just get out of the way, let me come in there. You're absolutely spot on that. And so that kind of leads into number 8 here, which is having the answers versus asking the right questions. And for this one, I want to use a story. I don't remember where I heard this, but I heard it from somewhere. It's not my own story. But this new employee steps into the boss's office and has to ask about the leave policy. And the boss, having written the employee handbook himself, he steps up and he's like, oh yeah, you got to have 72-hour notice. And he recites what page that notice requirement is on. You can find all the leave requirement here. And then here's where you find the leave request form on the portal. And the new employee, kind of somewhat dejectedly says, okay, and goes back to work. And boss is all proud that he was able to just spout off all the information that the new employee needed to have just right off the top of his head, because he knows the policy inside and out. Thing is, moments later, a senior employee barges in and says, what the hell did you just say to the new guy? And the boss says, well, I answered his question. Why? He wanted to know about the leave policy, and I recited it to him because I know it inside and out. And the same employee says, his wife just went into labor with their first child, and he says you told him he needs to give you 72 hours notice. So the point here is, again, not necessarily having all the questions or having all of the answers, because as leaders and as managers, we feel like we need to know all of the answers and be able to just spout them off and have all the answers ready to go when we get a question. What we often don't do is stop and ask, why is this even a question in the first place? And if this boss had simply said, yeah, I can tell you, but why do you ask? Then the new employee would have said, well, my wife's in labor. I need to know what I need to do to get out of here. That's a very different situation, right? Or take this one step further, we've talked about before of knowing your employees and taking the time to get to know your team. Like if the boss had known that, the baby was coming along fairly soon, he might have just simply asked the question, why do you need to know? Is this a emergency? And so it comes down to asking the right questions. Now, it doesn't mean you have to question everything when somebody brings something up to you, but getting that back to that idea of culture, or what I call organizational ecology, what I teach in my leadership programs. Asking just more and better questions helps you understand your team better. And in so doing, it helps you build trust. And that is absolutely foundational to a high functioning organization. And so simply just asking more and better questions before you jump to having all the answers, that's going to help you come a long way in your leadership process.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one that I maybe not on that context, but this is one that I fall into sometimes, that I have to kind of check myself and think about, what is the person digging at in this question, and just open up space for conversation. Even if it is something as large as, like, yeah, this is exactly what the handbook says. Even just saying, well, it does say that you have to have 72-hour notice, but why do you ask? Can we have that conversation, and not just spouting off and continuing on and giving every little detail, without allowing the other person space to speak.
Yeah, and
And
it opens up the door for innovation as well. When
exactly.
your teammates, comes up to you and brings up something, say, what about this? They're not necessarily looking for a yes or a no. And if you simply open the conversation and say, okay, so what is it that brought you to that line of thinking? Or what about our current way of doing it? Do you think could be improved? And pretty soon that opens the door for some ideas to generate, and for innovation and for new ways for them to do things.
Exactly. And so as we're starting to implement things, this brings us to number 9, this idea of perfection versus progress. So as next level leaders, they focus on progress towards a bigger vision, recognizing that there is no such thing as perfect. It will never be perfect any more than it will ever be done. I recently just heard this on a podcast that someone said, never let perfection get in the way of done. And that really stuck with me, that, like, it's never, you have to draw the line somewhere. Nothing is ever going to be 100% perfect from different people's perspectives. It might be perfect to you, but from someone else's perspective, might not be perfect. So you have to be able to draw the line of when it's done. And if we're able to cultivate an ecosystem, the cultivating of an ecosystem is never done. And that's what we're doing. It's what is the perfect prairie, or the forest anyways? Like, every year, if you're out there looking at the species, every year there's something different, that there's going to be a different species come up. And then the next year it might be gone. Like, I think it was last year or 2 years ago. I can't remember the name of the species, but I found a species that had never been found at Hitchcock before, and now it hasn't been found again since. And so what is perfect anyways? Is the perfect prairie with or without that species? And if it's showing up once, is that there or not? Nothing is ever perfect. What is the perfect park? When something is as dynamic as an ecosystem or a workplace, there is no perfect, only progress. And you can seek out, like, the best management practices along the way, or have, like, the SOPs in the workplace. You can seek out working towards perfection, but you have to be able to focus on progress and not just making sure that everything is absolutely perfect.
Yeah, and that's that's a critical kind of dichotomy here. And this one, when we were scripting this out, this one kind of just like gnawed at my soul, because I very much am the type that, like, all right, there is an optimal way to do everything. There's perfection that can be achieved in everything, but that's not how it works. So maybe you can claim that if it's something that has a set endpoint, and maybe on certain projects you can have that, but all of your projects and all of your tasks and anything that you accomplish is only lending towards the bigger picture of your overall organization's operation. So, yeah, I mean, like you said, what is the perfect prairie or the perfect forest or the perfect park? No, it's never done. Like you go back to Simon Sinek and his book, The Infinite Game, where he talks about it's not like it's a basketball game where there's a set time limit and where there's a set score that you measure at an endpoint, like life and work and ecological management. That's all infinite. And so we have to lose this idea that it can be perfect because it's only ever progress.
Exactly. And like, actually, a project I did this week was cutting honeysuckle in a place I had already cut honeysuckle 4 years ago. And
Okay.
4 years ago, we were treating with Garlon, which we came to find out doesn't really work on cut stump treatment on honeysuckle. And so it's like we thought we were perfect that day. 4 years later, we're there doing the same thing because we were just using the wrong chemical.
Yep. And we cut honeysuckle every day out of areas that you cut 10 years ago. So, and which is the same places that previous employees had planted it 30 years ago. Because at the time, the line of thinking was that this was good for wildlife. And so they planted the shit all over the place. And then they found out that it takes over your woodlands and everything. And so now the very same organization that planted it 2 generations ago are out there trying to cut it and kill it. So it's a dynamic, never changing or ever changing situation. Okay. Last one here. Number 10, habit versus intentionality. Early level leaders operate out of habit. They fall into routines, they fall into ruts, and you don't realize it. Now, while some of these habits may serve you well, it's easy to become blind to opportunities and pitfalls along the way. So, like failing to notice the Sericea lespedeza, it's an invasive species that we have around here that's coming up in the prairie, or the Oriental bittersweet, another invasive species we have around here that's coming up in the timber and choking out your trees. Failing to notice it early because you're just so used to seeing those trees. And then suddenly you happen to see it and you realize that it's everywhere and you're reached a point where like we have one field that it came up in so prolifically that we're gonna start from scratch,
Mhm.
burn it down, we're gonna kill it with chemical, we're gonna Roundup Ready bean it for a year or two and start fresh because it's just yeah. And so next level leaders are constantly questioning their routines, their habits. They're always asking how could things be better? In your situation, we've been using this Garlon, and now we find out that it's not as effective. And when you talked earlier about, well, we've always burned in the spring, so we just burn in the spring. But then, and you get in that rut, you get in that habit, and that's just what we do. But then you realize that if you really want to promote certain species, that burn in the spring is absolutely going to work against you. And you ask what systems, what ways of doing things aren't serving us well anymore, and what ways of doing things aren't efficient or are bogging the team down, kind of like we talked about in our last episode or a couple episodes ago about the law of subtraction. What are those meetings that have come up onto our calendar that's eating into our time here and there, and these reports that we're doing, and just whatever, that little admin stuff that pops up that just little by little takes away your time. And if you're in that habit and if you're in the rut and you're not constantly stepping out and looking around and noticing these things, then it's real easy for them to eat away at your culture. And so it's all about being intentional, observant, and then dedicating the time to attacking these things. And there's a great lesson about this in Jocko Willink's book, The Dichotomy of Leadership. And you had mentioned earlier, you've got to be in it enough to know what's going on, but you have to be far enough back that you can see the bigger picture. I think he used the example of a SEAL group getting ready to breach a room, and so they're in the group, and the team leader wasn't right there at the front breaking down the door where he's got tunnel vision and he's looking at the door that they've got to bust through. He was far enough back that he could look around and realize we're not even going through the right door. I don't remember if that was the exact story, but that's kind of the lesson here, is that's where you've got to be as leaders. Next level leaders are just constantly skeptical of your habits, of the routines, and you're very intentional about challenging the status quo, recognizing what got you and your team here won't necessarily get you there, wherever that is for you and your team, wherever you aspire to be for you and your team and your operation. And it's just like we opened up this episode with, like trees letting go of leaves. Next level leaders are willing to let go of old habits, ways of doing things, ways of thinking, operational stuff, meetings, admin stuff, You're willing to let that go in service of better parks and healthier lands and waters. And that's what we strive to be as great leaders.
Exactly. So there are plenty more of these examples, but this is definitely a good start for us. So, we've talked about a lot today, and it's likely that you might be listening to this in a skid loader. Maybe you're just riding around in the work truck and you couldn't take notes because if you've ever tried to take notes in a skid loader, you can't read them later. It's a bad idea. And you also can't use AI on your phone either because it's so loud in there, it can't hear you. So, if you want to, just so happens that we've actually summarized these 10 leadership mindset shifts into a downloadable PDF, which you can actually get right from the show notes.
Yeah. And if you aspire to be a next level leader, we invite you to join the community. You'll notice that we're trying to, do more of this downloadable PDF and just give you some more resources to be the leader that our organizations and our communities need us to be. So go to parksandrestoration.com and join right there from the homepage. On mobile, it'll be down at the bottom. You got to scroll all the way down through the first few episodes that it gives you. If you're on a desktop computer, it's right there on the right-hand side, just down the page a little bit. We've already got that exclusive virtual meetup with a best-selling author on the calendar, and we've got more events in the works. And as part of that next level leadership group, you'll get emails that will have things like this 10-point list of mindset shifts for becoming a next level leader. So be sure to join that community.
Exactly. And just like we said earlier, navigating the challenges of work as parks and conservation professionals is worth it, but nobody should feel alone doing it. We'll live alone in a world of wounds, but we don't have to be alone anymore. So our goal is to build some community around what we do, and you can help us by joining the mailing list, subscribing to the show on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube. Make sure you leave a review, and you can follow us on Instagram and now Facebook. All you have to do is just search for the Parks and Restoration Podcast.
All right, look at that, getting all over the socials and stuff. So that's it for today, folks. Better leaders, better parks. This is the Parks and Restoration Podcast, where every other Tuesday we share strategies to help you, the parks and natural resource professional, develop into the leader that your organization, your community, and future generations need you to be. Thanks for all you do out there, and we will talk again in a couple weeks. Take care.